Hey guys, Lachy from Focus Performance Training, and this week we're going to be going through volume intensity. I've just got back from the gym, and I had one of my mates hit me up last week after last week's video asking for me to do one on volume and intensity to sort of explain what they are, how we characterize the two variables of training, and why we need to be cognizant of both of those variables when we're looking at designing our training and when we're actually participating in our training. Now, I'm gonna first define, as I always do, what volume and what intensity is. Okay, so volume essentially is the word we use to define how much training we're doing. Now, if you're an endurance runner, that can be done as kilometers on the legs, so how far you're running per week, per month, per mesocycle, whatever it may be. For lifters, a lot of time that's characterized by load, which is load is the sum of weight that you moved times the reps that you moved. That can be your set volume, so how many reps per set, your session volume, can be your weekly volume, your mesocycle volume. It can get extrapolated out exponentially. It's huge. And volume is, from what the research says, if you look at sort of JPS education and Mike Israel and what they're pushing out, volume is one of the main drivers for hypertrophy. So we're in the early phases of our training, especially for strength stuff. This is our a big ticket item. We need a lot of volume to drive hypertrophy and to drive a stimulus. On the other hand, intensity can be defined by your heart rate, perceived rate of exertion, so how hard you're working on a scale of 1 to 10. Cool fun fact for the day for you nerdy guys. The original RPE scale was on a scale of 6 to 22. That's the Borg scale, and it's I don't understand why 22 and why 6. I think 1 to 10 is a lot more intuitive, and luckily it's been proven in research. Okay, back to intensity. So when we come to weight training, that's percentage of 1RM. That can be done by, again, like I said, RPE, and I use something that I've seen from, again, Mike Israel and a few other guys in the evidence-based community when it comes to the States, something called reps in reserve. And reps in reserve looks at you finishing the set with, say, 3 RIR, so 3 reps in reserve, okay? Dictates the intensity. We can also look at intensity being the absolute load on the bar. It can be your METs, so METs is a figure of how hard we're working based on our metabolic equivalent and all that sort of stuff. So they're the basic and the most common times you'll see intensity, and volume is you're looking at total kilos moved, we're looking at total meters, all that sort of stuff, okay? So why are these two so important to understand with strength training, to understand with training in general, okay? I'm going to start with volume. Now, volume is, it's a very, very important characteristic, because without the appropriate volume leading into a session or leading into a comp, etc., we put ourselves at risk of injury. Now, whether that's insufficient volume or too much volume, it can be dangerous. So we've got to look at those two as just as dangerous as each other. So that means that, say, I'm not going into a perfect example right now being the CrossFit Games. On day 2, they did something like 300 pull-ups in a day. A day after, they then went and hit a max clean. Okay, if you're not accustomed to that volume coming into that session, you're not going to be able to do your max clean. You're not going to be able to keep your arms straight, because your biceps are going to be that sore and that fatigued that you're not going to be able to stay straight and keep your arms straight and get a good pull on the bar. Okay. Similarly, if we're going into endurance running and someone hasn't completed, let's say you're doing a half marathon and you haven't really pushed towards that sort of half marathon distance, you haven't got used to that volume on the legs, you're going to come up pretty much a little bit short. On the vice versa, if you're going into a half marathon and you're running a marathon and a half every weekend, you're probably doing too much volume, and you're probably not even going to get to the point where you're doing that half marathon, because you're going to get to a point of overtraining. When you look at sort of that CrossFit style thing, we look at people who push too hard, do too much volume. That's a big one for CrossFit. They'll do too much and they won't recover sufficiently. And instead of having their progress sort of, I don't know if you can see it because my pens are quite small, but instead of you having sort of gradual progress like that, what will happen is over time, you'll come up and you'll start to plateau, or you start to decrease. So instead of continually increasing in your ability, you'll start to see a little drop off in performance, and that's purely because you're not providing the body with enough intensity and enough recovery or enough time to recover in between sessions. Okay, so that's where volume is quite important. Right, as I said, when we're looking at volume for hypertrophy, it's very, very dependent on the person, but generally when we're looking at your sets and how many reps you want to do, there's three main rep areas for hypertrophy when it comes to strength training. The first being your 1 to 10, so that's your moderately heavy loads or your quite heavy loads, quite intense. 10 to 20, that's sort of mid-range, and then 20 to 30, and that's where we're looking at that metabolic adaptation, me pushing fat. I can go into a whole video on hypertrophy if you guys would like, and that can send me down a rabbit hole in itself. Okay, let me look at intensity. Okay, intensity is really important when we come to trying to increase our maximal capacity. So when we look at running, we need to be running at high intensity of our VO2 max if we want to increase our VO2 max. When we're looking at strength training, if we want to increase our strength, not getting general strength, which is in that sort of 3 to 6 rep range, if we want to increase our maximal strength, being the 1 to 3 1 to 3 rep max, we need to be at a relatively high or maximal intensity. And when I say maximal intensity, I'm referring to 85% to 100%. And in some cases, when we look at weightlifting and powerlifting, we look at super maximal intensities, where we do stuff like your clean pulls, snatch pulls, jerk recoveries, and that sort of stuff, okay? You can even look at front squats as super maximal intensities in comparison to the clean. When you look at endurance training or sort of CrossFit, we're looking at that, we're pushing through and we're trying to get the intensity right. So there's lots of different zones when we come to endurance training, like you got your zone 1 to zone 6, and there's all types of different zones that we can work at, and I'll dive into that in a later video if you guys want. Okay, so when we pair these two up, when we pair volume and intensity up, we need to be cognizant that they're exclusive, or they work in opposites. So you're not going to be able to see these markers because they're really fine. I'm going to have to invest in new markers to put them down. If you guys can't see this, hit me up, and what I'll do, if you can't see the video properly, you can't zoom in on it, I'll throw up a graph, a link in the feed, and I'll throw it on my Instagram as well after this video to give you guys an idea of what I mean by the inverse relationship between volume and intensity. Okay, so if this is just a normal graph along here, okay, we're going to have volume and intensity plotted on the same graph. So generally in a cycle, say we're doing a strength cycle, 12-week strength cycle, just as an easy example, we're going to start that 12-week strength cycle with a general adaptation phase or hypertrophy phase. So that means, like I said before, hypertrophy is going to have to be a little bit higher, and volume subsequently will be lower, because you can't do 100% of your 1RM for 10 reps. You can't, otherwise it's not your 1RM. Okay. So as our volume tends to come down and decrease, our intensity will start to climb up. Okay, so we have this sort of inverse relationship. This is sort of percent there, and this is just time. Okay, so I'll just do that there. All right, so as we decrease our volume over time, our intensity will increase. If we keep intensity low as volume goes low, and we do that for an extended period of time, we're not going to get a stimulus, and we're not going to get enough of a training effect to cause adaptation. Okay. However, if we put intensity up here right next to volume, and we try and maintain incredibly high intensity with incredibly high volume, you're going to break your athletes, and you're going to break yourself very, very quickly. Okay. So let's just use this for an example. We're coming down to here, and as we come back up, intensity is going to rise up. Now we get this little funny area in the middle just here, where intensity and volume are equal. And from my experience and from the research sort of looks at, is this period just here is almost a danger zone. Now it's really easy for us to overreach in this area and to push a little bit too hard. So if we're looking at a training and we're realizing that we're probably at that 70%, 75, 70, probably around that 70 to 80% mark, in and around there, we need to be aware that the sessions could be quite nasty because we're pushing for quite a long period of time, and we can maintain a relatively high intensity through that. Okay. So during this period, we need to be aware that along this time frame, around here, we could start to see niggles and a few things sort of pop up. And the best example I can give for that is you're going through a strength training program, and if you've ever done a proper strength or a squat cycle, you'll understand what I mean. When you get through those first 6 weeks and you're getting towards a 12-week block and those last 3 weeks is your test week, when you get to that sort of week 9, 10, 11, your body's feeling beat up. And that is a result of really high intensity matched with residual fatigue from here. Okay. Now I'll touch on what residual fatigue is very quickly so you understand what I'm talking about. When we provide a stimulus and when we provide a load or a training effect to a body, you're going to carry that over to the next day and the next day. Okay. The best example I can give of residual fatigue is, say you're going to do a marathon. Okay. You're going to carry some of that fatigue for probably about the next week because the volume was so high. All right. Volume is a driver of fatigue, whereas intensity, not so much. And actually, in the most recent research, I think Chris Beardsley released something last month, which looks at intensity doesn't really cause nervous system fatigue. It's actually, and this is sort of contrary to what I thought and what my opinions were, but it's actually a result. We can see central nervous system fatigue being a result of long distance running and running at high intensities. So when we're balancing those two programs out, we need to be aware of that volume when we're running as well and how it's going to cross over to our strength training and our nervous system, our readiness essentially. Okay. So that's a little inverse relationship on volume and intensity with a little bit of stuff from residual fatigue thrown in there. Okay. Now, say we want to build up and there's this idea of a deload. Now, a deload is characterized by a decrease in volume and the maintenance of intensity. Now, a lot of people tend to just drop off the bandwagon completely and they just cut everything back on a deload. And I don't recommend that for the same reason that if we don't provide enough load, enough volume in leading up to a competition or to an event, we're at risk of undertraining. And if we provide too much, we're at risk of overtraining. So in a deload, what I recommend is cut your volume back by about 40%, all right? And maintain your intensity. So if you can maintain the intensity, and I'm not saying do 3 singles at 90%. You don't need that. So look at the minimum intensity that you need to put to, minimum intensity you need to provide the body or provide your athlete in order to achieve the stimulus that you're after. Okay, so if you're after a strength stimulus, you're probably looking at about that 85% mark for maybe a double, 2 or 3 doubles, something along those lines of that. Okay, so you want very small reps in the vicinity of 2 to 3. If we're looking at hypertrophy, a deload could be as simple as maybe you built up to facets of 10 for your squats, you're doing like lots of leg press and lunges, very, very arduous work. Maybe in your deload, you just do quite an intense session, but it's nice and sharp, nice and quick, so and overdone quickly. So an example of that could be, all right, let's accumulate 150 reps in a back squat at body weight. Just going for as big a reps as you can. You're going to get a massive, massive metabolic stimulus from that. But your volume, if you're just doing that for one set, 150 reps done, I guarantee you've probably accrued more reps over your past few weeks. So if you look at your volume of that day compared to volumes of your past day, it's probably a little bit lower. And you've decreased the volume, you've given yourself a hell of a session, and you've maintained intensity. Okay. That's a really easy way that you can look at it. What else do you guys need to know about volume intensity? I think that's about it, really. I mean, if you look at intensity, as I said before, is a driver for performance, in my opinion. I look at intensity as, okay, if I'm going to program intensity, it's a driver for our performance adaptations. When I look at volume, that's the driver for our endurance adaptations and our longevity adaptations. So one thing I didn't touch on, and I will touch on quickly here, when we look at volume, that's when we, especially in strength training, that's where it's going to get really good for ligaments, tendons, and our connective tissue. They tend to be a little bit more receptive to moderate volume rather than really high intensity. Okay, So when I'm programming, the best example for that could be programming from like a tendinopathy or coming back from a ligament strain we're trying to build up. The very first phase, we're looking at isometric holds. So we're building up volume in an isometric position because isometric is the easiest contraction for a body to sort of hold. It takes less energy because the muscle isn't changing length. From there, our next movement is concentric because it's the second least damaging. And then we add an eccentric. So even in that little progression there, we're looking at smallest volume in terms of contraction movement. So the amount of movement that the limb is going through. So if I look at a bicep curl, the amount of movement that my arm is going through in a concentric and eccentric is quite large in comparison to the volume of me just holding there. There is no movement in my bicep. And then concentric, and then relaxing completely for eccentric, so there's no stress on the muscle. Okay? So that's volume and that's intensity. And this is a real basic, so I can dive a little bit further into this if you guys want. If you want me to dive into volume and intensity for strength, weightlifting, S&C, and trying to manage the volume of two different, modalities, for example, sprinting, running, and strength training, I can dive into that too. And just quickly, I'll give you a little bit of a throwaway here. You want to try and keep them like, even sort of like our volume and intensity here. When your volume for one's high, you want the volume for the other quite low, and then you want to be able to taper it like that. And eventually throughout the program, those sort of waves, like a DNA nucleus, so one's high like that, we want to sort of come down and taper off and match each other when we're getting towards competition. Okay? So we bias the one that we need the most, and then we sort of move through like so. And that's the way that I look at it. We can do it when we got strength here and volume and endurance here, and we try and drop them off as we go down. From my opinion though, you're looking at a lot of volume there, and the body's going to have it's going to be very, very hard for the body to recover from that amount of volume from two different signals. Okay? So, I've got some more videos in the works coming up. If you've got something else that you want me to touch on, I've had people ask me about intermittent fasting. I've had people ask me about weightlifting progressions, like what can I do for certain deficiencies. The problem with those is that they're very personal. I will do them. I'll give you some sort of a quick sort of flow chart, if you will, as to how we can break down if you're having problems with your weightlifting stuff. Looking at our volume and intensity. I hope you guys have enjoyed this today. I've got some more branding. I'm going to start calling myself In Short, or the company. Instead of Focused Performance Training, I'll start calling it FPT, just to try and so I haven't got that massive mouthful to spew out. And go from there. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. If you've got any questions, leave them below. Remember to subscribe and like, and I'll see you guys next week for another video. Thanks.